All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to look at the massive, escalating chain reaction that literally plunged the entire globe into the deadliest conflict in human history. World War II, right? It wasn't just some sudden explosion out of nowhere. It was the result of a meticulously laid, slow-burning fuse. It's honestly fascinating to uncover the exact events, the strategies, and the hidden details that allowed this catastrophe to unfold.
There's a famous saying that basically boils down to this. You really can't point a finger at just one single day or one isolated incident and say, yep, that is why World War II started. It's more like a giant puzzle. It was a highly complex web of resentments, political maneuvers, and unchecked aggression that conspired together over decades to eventually light that flame of war. So, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the seeds of resentment, then we'll look at the rise of extremism, expansion and appeasement, the spark, lightning war, and finally, the fall of Europe.
Part 1. The Seeds of Resentment.
Okay, to really understand how all of this kicked off, we have to rewind to 1919. The First World War just ended, and we get the infamous Treaty of Versailles. Specifically, there's this thing called Article 231, often known as the War Guilt Clause. Now, regardless of who actually fought in that war, Germany alone was forced to bear the absolute brunt of the international humiliation. The treaty essentially stated that Germany was entirely to blame for every single loss suffered during the conflict.
And look, this blame? It wasn't just symbolic. France and Britain hit Germany with a staggering fine of $33 billion to recover their own losses. To put that into perspective for us today, we're talking roughly $270 billion. It was a completely insurmountable financial burden. In fact, it was so massive, Germany only made the final payment for it a century later, literally in the year 2010.
So trying to pay this impossible fine absolutely destroyed the German economy. We're talking hyperinflation on a scale that's hard to even wrap your head around. Think about this stark comparison. Imagine going to buy a packet of bread in Berlin in 1922. It costs you 160 marks. Fast forward just 1 year to 1923, and that exact same packet of bread costs 200 billion marks. 200 billion! The currency became totally worthless overnight, and ordinary citizens were just thrust into poverty and starvation.
Part 2. The Rise of Extremism.
So, you have citizens who are starving, they're humiliated, unemployment is through the roof. This profound desperation created the absolute perfect vacuum. And into that vacuum steps Adolf Hitler. He essentially manipulated these distressed masses, systematically transitioning from a failed revolutionary to an absolute dictator. Back in 1923, he actually survived a failed coup, which bizarrely just boosted his popularity. He used heavy propaganda to spread these vile conspiracy theories, like Judeo-Bolshevism, basically scapegoating Jewish and socialist populations for all of Germany's disgrace. Then the 1929 Great Depression hits. 6 million Germans lose their jobs. Children are starving. The stage was perfectly set. By 1933, he capitalized on all this misery, declared himself absolute dictator, and started pushing his vision for a quote-unquote racially pure empire.
Part 3. Appeasement and expansion. Now that he's firmly in control of the country, Hitler focuses his expansionist goals on this really dangerous ideology called Lebensraum, which translates to living space. The idea was that for his so-called Aryan race to thrive, they needed land, they needed resources. So to satisfy his ego and advance his nation, he believed he absolutely had to aggressively conquer neighboring, German-speaking countries just to extract their wealth and territory.
And the way he expanded, it was a masterclass in manipulation. Just look at how it played out over time. In 1935, Britain actually lets Germany rebuild its navy. Unbelievable, right? By 1938, Hitler uses fake news and intimidation to infiltrate and annex Austria without spilling a single drop of blood. Then we get the Munich Agreement. The British Prime Minister is so desperate to avoid another war that he just hands over the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia to Hitler, thinking, okay, this appeasement will guarantee peace. But obviously, less than a year later, Hitler breaks his promise and invades the rest of Czechoslovakia. Appeasing him literally only fueled his unchecked aggression.
Part 4. The Spark. So, with appeasement failing miserably, Hitler's next target is Poland. But to pull this off, he executes this incredibly sly, totally unexpected maneuver, the 1939 Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. Hitler fiercely despised communist ideology, but he signed this pact with Stalin anyway. Why? Because their interests temporarily aligned on one very specific goal, carving up Polish territory between the two of them. This shocking alliance completely pushed the UK and France over the edge, and they finally issued a firm ultimatum to Germany.
Hitler, of course, ignores the ultimatum.
He invades Poland with 1 million troops, and Britain and France officially declare war. But what happens next is often called the phony war. The whole world is holding its breath, but absolutely no real military support is actually sent to Poland. Poor Poland, right? Their old-fashioned army was literally still riding horses into battle. They were completely decimated by the highly mechanized German forces in less than a week.
Part 5. Blitzkrieg and crystal meth.
Which brings us to a really fascinating, honestly terrifying question. How on earth did Germany's army move so incredibly fast? The secret was a brand new military doctrine called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Forget the long, muddy, drawn-out trench warfare of the First World War. Hitler's generals focused on overwhelming speed, stealth, and absolute surprise. The whole point was to completely paralyze opponents and win the battle before the enemy even had a chance to react or formulate any defensive plan.
The anatomy of this blitzkrieg is basically a highly synchronized dance of destruction. It starts with devastating ground invasions using fast-moving tanks that just punch holes right through defensive lines. That's immediately followed by massive overhead bombing campaigns by the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. By coordinating these rapid strikes, they kept entire military campaigns to less than a week. The sheer suddenness of it left neighboring countries totally disoriented and overwhelmed.
But here is a truly wild detail about how they sustained that incredible speed. The German military utilized a secret weapon, a drug called parvitin. Today, we know this substance as crystal meth. Yes, really. By heavily drugging their soldiers, the German army eliminated fatigue, suppressed hunger, and pretty much erased fear. Their troops could literally fight day and night without stopping to sleep, giving them a terrifying, artificially supercharged advantage over defending Allied troops who, eventually had to rest.
Part 6. The Fall of Europe. Armed with this unstoppable drug-fueled strategy, Hitler turns his attention westward, looking to absolutely crush France and the remaining Allied forces. And the invasion of France was a total masterstroke of deception. The Allied forces heavily guarded the borders of Belgium and the fortified Maginot Line. So the Germans split into 3 groups. Group B attacks the Netherlands and Belgium to draw the Allied armies north. Group C attacks the Maginot Line as a loud distraction. But Group A, they execute the real master plan. They sneak 40,000 military vehicles straight through the Ardennes forest. French military experts believe this dense forest was totally impenetrable by tanks. Well, they were wrong. This maneuver completely outsmarted the Allies, trapping them from behind.
Surrounded on 3 sides, the Allied armies get pushed all the way to the coast, leaving them with exactly one escape route, the sea near the port of Dunkirk. And 350,000, that is the miraculous number of Allied soldiers successfully evacuated from those beaches during Operation Dynamo. Under incredibly heavy fire, using literally everything from British Royal Navy ships to private civilian fishing boats, hundreds of thousands of men were saved from total annihilation. But even with that miraculous evacuation at Dunkirk, the grim reality on the continent was undeniable. France formally surrendered shortly after. Dictator Mussolini and Italy officially joined forces with Germany, forming the Pact of Steel. And by July of 1940, Hitler had effectively swallowed up nearly the entirety of Western Europe, all the way from Norway down to France.
Let's just pause for a second and look at the geopolitical board at this exact moment in history. The United States is staunchly refusing to intervene, wanting absolutely no part in another European war. The Soviet Union has their non-aggression peace treaty keeping them out of the fight entirely. Hitler holds a massive, almost insurmountable upper hand here. Honestly, if the fighting had stopped right at this moment, Adolf Hitler would have been the undisputed, clear victor of this global conflict. Which leaves us with this incredible concluding question. With the rest of Western Europe completely fallen, and America just watching from the sidelines, how on earth did Britain survive? With the infamous Winston Churchill now at the helm, and the British Isles standing completely alone against an unstoppable drug-fueled Nazi war machine, what happens next? Well, that is a fascinating strategic turning point you'll definitely want to learn more about as the history of this monumental conflict continues to unfold.